In society, morality is ever changing, keen to favor that with which we value most. Society's infatuation and willingness to redeem the infamous Marvel's Loki is a quintessential example of how moral absolutism has begun to fade in favor of a more fluid understanding of good versus evil. The dictionary definition of good and evil are tangential when it comes to the MCU. Characters that are considered good selflessly risk their lives for the greater well-being of society, while evil characters are portrayed as self-centered, power-hungry beings. So where does Loki fall into this archetype? Our answer lies in the more recent popular concept of the antihero. An antihero is defined as a main character who lacks traditional heroic attributes such as idealism, courage, and morality. Now, let's take Avengers Infinity War Loki, for example. Unlike his 2012 predecessor, who have tried to conquer the world numerous times, this Loki sacrifices himself in a Tony Starr-esque manner, saving half the universe. Does this instance make him a hero? If it were up to the trolley dilemma, a psychological experiment that explores ethics in questioning whether to sacrifice one person to save a larger number, he would be considered good. But what about those other instances where he killed thousands of people, including his own blood father? Should we just forget about those atrocities? The answer is, we kinda do. Because he tries to conquer the world first, but then he tries to save it later, we remember his actions chronologically as a redemption arc rather than isolated instances. He becomes a sort of antihero, as he is capable of courageous acts, but does so with a cynical personality and mischievous flair. His antiheroism story that brings him from darkness into light resonates with society's own experiences coming out of struggles. We are so keen to accept him the moment he shows a sliver of morality because we are desperate to recognize the hero in all of us. Yet, the term hero is used so loosely in today's world because what was once an absolute standard of right and wrong has become a spectrum of social acceptability. Loki is an agent of chaos, yet his intentions, whether they be right or wrong, can be understood and even relatable to the average person. Hi, I'm Yazzie Klein and welcome back to Oh So Marvelous. In our last episode, we explored how the Wasp reflects the lack of representation of women in the media. In this episode, we take a different turn, focusing on a character who's not typically regarded as a superhero, but whose depth may reveal some hidden qualities. Loki reflects the cultures in which he was created because his unique collection of traits, such as his bisexuality and mischievousness, challenges the values and identities of the established majority in society. Because Marvel's Loki rise to fame coincides with the growth of social media, voices that would normally be silenced are heard distinctively and loud, highlighting communities such as the LGBTQIA+ that would normally be underrepresented. Before we begin, there are a few things that need to be clarified. This is an oversimplification, but it'll add clarity to some topics discussed throughout this episode. Loki, throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has experienced various storylines and character arcs. As I explained earlier, the Loki that you see through Thor all the way till his death in Infinity War is a different Loki than what you see in the new Loki Disney Plus miniseries. Unlike Infinity War, Loki in the Disney Plus miniseries is very much alive. Yet this version is from his 2012 self during the Avengers, the villain era, as I like to call it. All of the progress and maturity he developed hasn't happened yet in this Loki lifetime, meaning this Loki is still insensitive, malicious, and hasn't recognized the errors in his ways yet. This will be important to understand as I analyze why we still regard him as a beloved antihero. So, let's get into the episode. As a reflection of society's faults, both Marvel and Norse mythology's character of Loki embodies the dissonance between what's socially acceptable and what's not. E.J. Beaton, a Pushcart Prize poetry winner who wrote Loki as Other, Why Do Queer and Female Viewers Love the Trickster, has an expertise on subjects that include Norse and Greek gods, which allows her to expand on the creation of Loki. In her 2021 article, she explains, the original folklore depicting Loki made him appear as a more overtly sexual figure than he is in today's media. Loki embodies the ambiguous and darkening relationship between the gods and the giants. Striking depictions throughout the tales illustrate Loki's physical alterity. His eyes gleam different colors, including brown, green, and indigo, and his scarred lips twist into a wolfish smile. The scarring also serves as a reminder of Asgard's desire to silence its mischievous, chaotic other. Loki turns the status quo of the do-good, genuine hero on its head, not only by being the face of counterculture, but by crossing social boundaries through his physical characteristics that spawn chaos. Loki contributes to the reversal of the status quo by voluntarily defying its power. His blatant defiance angers the people of Asgard and furthers their desire to silence the mischievous chaotic other, aka Loki. Although Loki's free spirit and unbridled sense of individuality may seem punishable to more traditional viewers, younger generations such as millennials and Gen Zers are far less imprisoned by the unaccepting social standards. Loki instigates chaos in a world that strives for order, ultimately toying with the values of the heteronormative, conservative standard, not unlike his real-world young generation counterparts who are increasingly questioning the way we define sexuality, gender, and identity, among other social concepts. In the original comics, written in a far less progressive time, Loki was condemned for his immoral actions. There was no question about whether he had good in him, as his mischievous antics automatically had him labeled as evil, without hesitation. In Loki's introduction to the Marvel Comics, he is shown to be trapped in a tree, explaining, "Ages ago, the gods condemned me to be trapped within this tree. Here I am, destined to remain until my plight causes someone to shed a tear. But no inhabitant of Asgard will weep for me, for I am hated by all." Loki, shown to be trapped in a tree, is a physical embodiment of Marvel's efforts to hide what's deemed not acceptable by society. In Asgard, more specifically, they condemn him for being androgynous, ultimately reflecting their passive views on open people. Even explained by Loki, people hate him because Asgard conditioned their inhabitants to hate people who are like him, unapologetic for who they truly are, keeping them and their influence hidden from the rest of society. Although Loki is eventually freed by his own tear, ironic, right? This shift in Loki's fate is emblematic of a shift in society's understanding of right, wrong, and the meaning of being uncertain with oneself. As society continues to explore new ways of expressing oneself, as well as encouraging people to work through their confusion and become the people they're meant to be, we are more empathetic and flexible in interpreting Loki's actions, and this has granted him more praise than in Norse mythology and in the original comics. Moreover, Loki's shapeshifting abilities act as a metaphor for the complexities of people grappling with having to change their identity to fit in with their environment. Loki's journey towards the self-acceptance of his multifaceted personality has inspired us to embrace our own imperfections and uniquenesses. Author Helena Basil Morozo comments on this phenomenon in her article, Loki Then and Now, The Trickster Against Civilization. Out of the numerous articles she has written on tricksters, she explains, "Shapeshifting is closely linked to the issues of shame and identity. The trickster who use deception, shapeshifting for survival purpose, discard shame to reclaim their identity from the system. Loki, as we have seen, changes his gender, his appearance, his species, and the social order. Perhaps all of this is an attempt to change society's values. Since change sometimes takes time, especially when dealing with social norms inherently ingrained in society, the liminal trickster figure in mythology can be used as an outlet." Loki's shapeshifting ability reflects the ambiguity of his character. His constant need to shapeshift may seem like rebellious efforts against social norms, but he unintentionally uses it to safeguard his identity. It's both a facade and a guard meant to portray a given act to society, while Loki hides his true feelings and intentions. Importantly, Loki's most emotional and moral moments occur when he is most vulnerable, when the mask is lowered. This shows how Loki's shapeshifting acts as a metaphor for the defense mechanisms people put up as they try to introspectively understand themselves. He represents people who find comfort in shielding themselves but are nonetheless hidden. While they long for social acceptability, their shapeshifted identity ultimately leaves them unseen. Loki may have been sure of himself and his identity, but that doesn't divert from the fact that he, himself, was unconsciously afraid to accept himself. In a 2021 interview with Empire magazine, Tom Hiddleston, for those of you who have been living under a rock, he plays Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, expands on this interesting detail while discussing how the new shape-shifting logo in his show Loki reflects the nature of his character. Hiddleston proudly shares, "I think that the shape-shifting logo might give you an idea that Loki, the show, is about identity, and about integrating the disparate fragments of the many selves that he can be, and perhaps the many selves that we are. I thought it was very exciting because I've always found Loki a very complex construct. Who is this character who can wear so many masks and change shape and seems to change his external feelings on a sixpence? With this show and the deeper, raw understanding it brings to this complex and elusive character, we can deconstruct some of that hidden good that has been hiding behind Loki's shape-shifting shield. This inspires others to be more vulnerable and comfortable with themselves via the knowledge that we can still be accepted as we are despite imperfections, even if we stop putting on a show. It also shows how society has become more open to investigating further into people and not just labeling themselves instantaneously. The curiosity that Loki's shape-shifting logo instills in both Tom Hiddleston and Marvel fans shows how society has a newfound proclivity towards exploration. Political and social movements fighting to end discriminatory stereotypes and labels has inspired society to, in general, shift away from making cold-cut assumptions, and thus propels our openness to reversing our preconceived notions of world domination Loki to see if there might be some good within him. Even the creation of Disney Plus Loki show, which allows over 6 hours of screen time to exploring Loki's character further, shows how society is more willing to view people more holistically and provide second chances. Loki represents the gray between good and evil, as his imperfections speak to a nationwide shift in desire for more relatable, faulted characters because society has come to resonate more with characters that are imperfect, better reflecting humanity. Youth Voices, in support of the National Writing Organization, is a social networking platform that provides an outlet for young bloggers, specifically students, to express their own opinions freely in collaboration with other peers. Students are only allowed to comment, but researchers, like me, can access these blogs at any time. Megan, one of the more popular bloggers, explains, "The concept of heroes and villains in society is not purely black and white because people cannot be defined as completely moral or completely corrupt. There are a lot of gray areas that almost every human falls into, making stories with perfect heroes and innately evil villains unrealistic and hard to relate to. As a result, in the media today, the concept of heroes and villains is slowly being altered and replaced by the anti-hero and anti-villain. Loki's character is a prime example of this gray area, known formally as moral ambiguity. It's the notion that morals can't be clearly defined because the world is complex, and the righteous choice isn't always the same for everyone due to differences in perspective, upbringing, and other situational factors. What is crucial here is the fact that Loki embraces his ambiguity. He believes in himself and stands by his choices even when they filter between what is standardly right and wrong. Loki's confidence serves as a beacon to misrepresented and oppressed communities, such as the LGBTQIA+ community that are ridiculed by society, as Loki often is, helping them to feel empowered and worthy of love and attention. This shows how superheroes reflect the changing morals of society because, as the needs of oppressed communities became louder, pop culture rose to provide entertainment that would echo the people it's meant to represent, embracing moral ambiguity and giving voices to those seen as taboo by society. Teen Vogue writer Stitch reflects on this phenomenon in their article, On Loki, Antiheroes and Who Gets to Be a Lovable Villain, published in June of 2012. They assert, Loki is crude, irrelevant, juvenile, and colored with self-loathing and contempt. There is no heroic language here, just the voice of everyday folk. He is no longer the voice of the lonely outsider, but the spokesman of the human condition. Villains and antiheroes appeal to fans because they can feel as if they are us, especially if the fans are marginalized or vulnerable in some way due to trauma. These characters can speak to aspects of our identity or past that we struggle to deal with or embrace. Good villains and antiheroes get to do bad things, be bad people, and still have value as characters. They have the freedom to seek revenge or get answers in tough situations, and fans imprint themselves on and link themselves to these characters fiercely. They are still central to the story, and isn't that just something to see yourself in? Although Loki was initially portrayed as a villain, with each Thor movie, and especially through the Loki Disney Plus series, Loki's decision-making is analyzed deeper to the point where audiences begin to question the true distinction between good and evil, and how Loki's mischief might not be all that bad after all, especially when Loki starts using his cunning for good, causes a troubling paradox to say the least. His conflicting actions and traits often cause viewers and readers to engage in their own introspection and self-reflection. Loki isn't afraid to own his faults, and he often uses them to his advantage, but he also isn't afraid to play into his more kind-hearted instincts, especially when making decisions. This contradiction in his character creates a gray area that is essential to his popularity as an antihero. As our episode ends, we must wonder what the implications are of entertainment being sculpted by our political landscape. Loki's character evolves from something that is frowned upon as being solely evil to a metaphor for the way Loki hides his true self. As Marvel further explored Loki in more recent, progressive times, such as with the Disney Plus show, Loki entered the spotlight in an entirely new frame. He was given an anti-hero character arc and was painted in a favorable light that embraced his mischief, shape-shifting, bisexuality, and other traits associated with harbors of chaos. This shift in the way Loki is portrayed was directly correlated with the increasing growth of the LGBTQIA+ community and their more publicized plight. Loki became a source of inspiration for the community, which used Loki as a way to embrace their own queerness. Thus, entertainment being tied to the political landscape can be used to perpetuate moral progress. When used to empower underrepresented people, the mix of entertainment and politics becomes a powerful force for the redefinition and establishment of better morals in society. Loki's transformation shows us how superheroes can be amplifiers for positive change, reaching a wide audience to make concrete the underrepresented political rumblings of social progress. In all 3 episodes, we have analyzed how Marvel heroes are tied to political progressiveness in society. But as our miniseries comes to a close, it is important to address one more important issue to culminate our journey. Right now, Marvel is the leading superhero storyteller. One might even venture as far as to say they have a monopoly on the superhero industry. This podcast miniseries has delved deeply into how Marvel's superheroes have evolved over time to reflect a changing society. But now, we must wonder what it means to only have prevalent superheroes who align with societal changes, potentially creating unhealthy ubiquity if left unchecked. Marvel began as an embodiment of imagination and stereotypes, but it slowly evolved into a vehicle for political and social change. By analyzing how political progressiveness has pushed its way into popular culture, we can see how the entertainment industry has shifted from non-biased, albeit ignorant to any social damages it might be implicating, to now bound to progressiveness and politics. It is vital that we are conscientious of what political and societal beliefs have intertwined into our superhero story arcs, especially in an era where the superhero industry is essentially monopolized, to ensure we are watching heroes that inspire and reflect the people we want to be without confining us to one specific ideology or mindset. Additionally, we must allow our superheroes to defy the status quo when progress is necessary. For Captain America, this meant learning that blind patriotism doesn't make someone the perfect American. With the Wasp, it was a transformative feminist process to make the character less sexualized and empower women to have their own voice. In Loki, the perspective of the character evolved from someone who was scorned and imprisoned to someone who is praised for their prowess and complexity, a villain-turned-beloved antihero. We must continue to promote moments like these where superheroes rise to the needs of a changing society to empower viewers to be the best version of themselves and shape a progressive, accepting society. I'm Yazzie Klein, and this is Oh So Marvelous. Thanks for listening.